Amy Klobuchar is a U.S. Senator from Minnesota, and she is not a good person. Let me just put it that way. I mean, we all have our flaws and all that, but she is a person who has actively harmed many, many people, and she's a warmonger. And this is her argument to MSNBC about why we should not have peace with Russia.
The fact that you have thousands and thousands of kids that were stolen and taken away from either their families or an orphanage. A number of the ones that I met recently in Rome when the Pope took a visit with us and with the kids was about actually teenagers who were taken when their mom was killed. Another was just taken from a school, and they have the wherewithal, because they're teenagers, to get a phone from someone, and they're able to call their grandma in one case, and she was with us, and they were able to get them out. And the Vatican's been really involved in negotiating a number of kids' release. But the fact that Putin thinks it's okay to take kids out of orphanages and away from their families just shows the evil we're dealing with and why it is so important for us to stand with Ukraine, this sovereign state that has taken all the bloodshed and basically stopped Putin from marching right through Ukraine to other allies, NATO countries.
Now, this is bullshit. Everything she just said there is bullshit. Everything she just said there is bullshit. But this is part of the anti-Russia narrative, right? So the claim is that Russia, is maniacally evil. And so in the process of this Ukraine war, they're kidnapping innocent children and taking them to Russia because they're mean and they just want to be mean and kidnap people. That's not what's happening. First of all, there isn't a war going on in Ukraine, in case you didn't notice. And, like thousands of people are dying every week, every couple weeks. You have 4-figure death counts, okay? 5-figure death counts. So if you have children, minors, people under the age of 18, are you supposed to just leave them there in a battle zone? Right? They said this woman, her mother was killed. So her mother was killed. Her mother's dead. She's in the middle of a place where there's active killing going on. What is Russia supposed to do? They're supposed to say, all right, stay here. Stay here. No, right? Taking children out of an active combat zone is not the wrong thing to do. It's actually a very good thing to do, right? I don't think children should be in areas where there's bullets flying over their head, where there's missiles. I mean, often in the middle of these conflicts, when you have children, when that their parents are getting killed and all that, you take them off the battlefield, right? That's the right thing to do. And President Trump, his wife, the First Lady, Melania, has actively praised Russia for how they have set up a program with the White House, with the Vatican, to reunite these kids with their parents, to reunite them with their family members. Russia is doing the right thing, taking children off the battlefield, then working with the White House and working with the Vatican to make sure they get back to their family members. What in the world is wrong with this? I mean, if you listen to her talking, you would think, oh, all Russia does is they just sit around. It's like, we are going to take the children and we're going to take them. Yes, we'll steal the children. That's not what's happening. Like, this is one of the craziest anti-Russian conspiracy theories I've ever heard, right? They are taking kids out of active combat zones, which is the right thing to do. Then they're working with Melania Trump and they're working with the Pope to get them back to their family members. My goodness, what an awful thing to do. What an awful thing to do, getting kids out of a conflict zone. And it is exactly the right thing to do. But I got to tell you, there is nobody less qualified to talk about this than Amy Klobuchar. And I will tell you why. Do you know who Amy Klobuchar is? Do you know who this woman is? You know who this person right here sitting next to Lindsey Graham is? Amy Klobuchar, she started out in politics in Minnesota as a prosecutor in the 1990s, right? Nowadays, since, the George Floyd stuff and since Black Lives Matter, there's a lot more awareness. But in the 1990s in the United States, when she was up and coming and making her career as a prosecutor, the rate of incarceration across America was rising. It was rising like you wouldn't believe. And Amy Klobuchar was a prosecutor in America, and she was a prosecutor in Minnesota. She was a woman whose job it was to fill up those jails for those prison profiteers. And Amy Klobuchar's trademark, you can look this up, and I wrote about this in my book on Kamala Harris. Her trademark was that she would terrify juries. Now, the first thing you need to remember about the American legal system, 99% of cases do not go to trial. Right? If you in America, if you're charged with a crime, the chances that you will actually have a jury trial are slim to none. The overwhelming majority of cases, people take plea deals. There is barely ever criminal trials. If there's a criminal trial, something's off. There's generally only two reasons that there's a criminal trial. One is the person's very, very wealthy, right? If a millionaire goes on trial, right, hey, it usually takes 2 years for the trial to finally happen. It's very expensive, but if you're a millionaire, you can go to trial because you're a millionaire. You can afford it, right? That's one reason, is the person's ultra wealthy. That was not the reason in her case, and we'll get to it in the cases she took on. We'll get to that in a minute. The second reason that you might go to trial is because you're innocent. Let me emphasize that. Why would somebody put themselves through 2 years of turmoil, 2 years of having to show up for court dates and not being able to hold a job, 2 years of paying legal fees, 2 years of not knowing if you're going to be going, to prison for a long time? Very, very few people subject themselves to going to a trial. If a case goes to trial in America, it's something's off. Something's not right. In some cases, if states have a 3-strike law where, it's your third felony, you automatically get 25 years in prison. So in some cases, for example, like if it's a third strike, right, in California, they would go to trial for their third strike because you got to do anything you can to avoid 25 years, things like that. But regardless, Amy Klobuchar was a trial prosecutor in the state of Minnesota, and her trademark was she would use gang experts. Gang experts. That was her trademark. Now, who are these gang experts that Amy Klobuchar would use? They were guys, former police officers usually, who knew absolutely nothing about the case. They had no knowledge whatsoever of the man on trial. It would always be a black man. There would be a black man on trial, and for some reason, he is having a criminal trial, which means there's a very good chance he's innocent, or why would he put himself through 2 years of paying legal fees and all of that? So there's a black man on trial, right? And he's having a criminal trial. Amy Klobuchar is the prosecutor. Her trademark was that she would have a gang expert who knew nothing about the case get up and testify, and they would allow this, and the gang expert would get up and tell the jury all kinds of horror stories about stuff that gangs do, right? Gangs, Crips, Bloods, they're nasty people, right? No one's going to pretend gangs are not ugly and nasty, rape, murder, theft, crime, etc. So they would put one of these former cops on the stand, a gang expert who knew nothing about the case, to just scare the bejesus out of the jurors and tell them about people who got shot in the face and people who got raped and people who got murdered. And the jurors are all looking at this black man who's on trial, and they're basically being told, if you find this guy not guilty, he's going to get out and he's going to do all these things. Even though, keep in mind, the gang expert knows nothing about the case. Nothing about the case, right? I mean, he's just there telling scary stories of how scary the gangs are and how awful they are, knows nothing about the case. And the gang expert, Amy Klobuchar's gang expert, would get up on the stand and scare the bejesus out of the jurors and tell them every nasty story about gangs. And basically, these jurors would convict black men, would convict them of crimes based on, oh, we don't want him to get out. He might be one of these gangsters, right? One of these gang people, right? So for Amy Klobuchar to be on CNN lecturing us about how she wants parents to be with their kids, there are thousands of black fathers in Minnesota who are not with their kids because of Amy Klobuchar. Thousands of them. Her whole career in the 90s, she was a destroy black families activist. That's what she did. She was a lock 'em up prosecutor with her gang experts. So if there's anybody who should not be talking about how awful it is to separate children from their parents, it's Amy Klobuchar. She is a unbelievable, vicious, sadist, liar, and con artist like you wouldn't believe. You wouldn't believe, right? I mean, look up the gang experts and Amy Klobuchar. She is a lying con artist. She is somebody who destroyed thousands of people's lives, right? She has absolutely no grounds to talk about this issue. And Amy Klobuchar, it's like, how do you find somebody who is capable of that level of evil, right? And that's like a theme in my Kamala Harris book, is I wrote the book about Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris did the same shit, right? Gang experts, all of that. She was a vicious prosecutor in the 90s, right? And how do you find it? Well, it's very interesting, right? Amy Klobuchar, right? Her father was an alcoholic who beat the crap out of her mother when she was a child, and her mother and father divorced, and she was raised by her mother, and that's how she grew up. And it's very interesting because Kamala Harris and her parents separated, and she was raised by her mother, and she hates her father, right? And Samantha Power, the regime change activist, a very similar story. And the way that the way Amy Klobuchar rose up as this ruthless prosecutor is because she wants revenge for what happened to her mother, right? She was estranged from her father for years until he, and she hates her father for beating up her mother. And so they basically, she was able to channel her hatred for her father, an alcoholic, onto all kinds of black men, and be vicious and be ruthless and get stats. That's what prosecutors in America all want. They all want stats, right? The worst thing that could ever happen is someone gets acquitted, right? God forbid somebody get acquitted and not go to prison for thousands of years. So she was desperate to get those stats, desperate to destroy some lives, because she wanted revenge for her father, revenge on her father, just like Kamala Harris, just like Samantha Power wants to invade countries. Samantha Power's entire career is making a war against some communist or socialist or anti-imperialist government led by a powerful man, right? And Samantha Power also, father, alcoholic, beat the mother. It's the same story, right? Amy Klobuchar is a psychologically damaged person who sees herself as a victim, is very angry, and has a lot of trauma from whatever went on, in her household. And so they have got her, and they enabled her to become somebody who is capable of a level of cruelty and indifference to other people's suffering and sadism that you would be, most people are not capable of. Most people are not going to be sitting there saying, all right, I'm going to make my career separating families. Most people who know the details of the American legal system are not going to think, oh, wow, here's one of these rare cases where somebody goes to trial. I'm going to hire a gang expert who's going to get on there and scare the crap out of these jurors, to convict a black man who's probably innocent. You have to find a person who is really, really damaged and full of rage and really, really is indifferent to other people's suffering. And that's Amy Klobuchar. So as you hear her talking on here, I'm going to play the clip again. There is nobody who absolutely, she should not be talking about this issue, right? For her to make this claim about Russia, right? It is outrageous. Let's play it again.
Have thousands and thousands of kids that were stolen and taken away from either their families or an orphanage.
Yeah, they were taken out of an active combat zone, right? You realize there were bullets flying. The Ukrainian army and the Russian army were fighting each other. And Russia said, you're under the age of 18. Let's get you the hell out of here. God forbid they take children out of an active combat zone. God forbid.
A number of the ones that I met recently in Rome, when the Pope...
In Rome, where the Russian government is cooperating with the Vatican and with Melania Trump to get these kids home, right? You met them in Rome because Russia helped them get to Rome. You do understand, right? You do understand that, right? That the reason you met them in Rome is because Russia helped get them there, you lying sack of shit.
Took a visit with us and with the kids, was about actually teenagers who were taken when their mom was killed.
So their mother died in a war, in an active combat zone. Their mother died, And Russia was just supposed to like leave them there on the battlefield and say, all right, you're on your own. Hope you can duck bullets. No, they got them out. Their mother was dead. And they got them out of an active combat zone.
Another was just taken from a school, and they
just taken, right? There was no war going on or anything. Russia just went to a school and said, all right, children, we're taking you. Give me a break. Just taken from a school, right? It's not like there's a war going on or anything like that. It was just, Russia drove up to a school with an unmarked van and offered the kids candy to get in the van. Like, what the fuck are you lying about?
have the wherewithal, because they're teenagers, to get a phone from someone, and they're able to call their grandma in one.
Yeah, so they called their grandma, right? But here's the thing. If they were already in Russia and they called their grandma, how did they get to Rome, right? Do you think Russia just lets people go? That's because Russia let them. They called their grandma and Russia arranged for them to go to Rome, you lying sack of shit. Like, do you not know how borders work? So what did they call their grandma and then like she flew a helicopter into Russia to airlift them? No, she called her grandmother, they made the arrangements. Like, what the hell are you talking about?
Case, and she was with us, and they were able to get them out. And
they were able to get them out, meaning that Russia enabled her to leave. Minors can't just walk across the Russian border. Have you ever been to another country before? They have these things called customs, and all of that. And if you're a minor, an unaccompanied minor who's been escorted out of a war zone, they don't just let you just walk across the border, right? If she was able to be there, that's because her release was arranged by Russia. Russia is actively reuniting these kids with their families. Read what Melania Trump, the first lady of the United States, has said about it. Like, yeah, Russia wants these kids reunited with their family. Russia is not engaging in any kidnapping. Russia is getting children out of active combat zones and back to their families. And you are making it into something it's not for political gain because you don't want peace.
The Vatican's been really involved in negotiating a number of kids' release. But
the Vatican has been involved. I thought Russia was just kidnapping these kids and disappearing them forever, right? So the Vatican and Melania Trump and Russia and the United States are all working to get these kids home. Oh, the horror. God forbid they try to get kids back to be with their parents, right? You just admitted here that the Vatican and Russia are talking and figuring out how to get these kids out. So that's not kidnapping. Actually, that means Russia's doing the right thing. You're admitting that, but that just doesn't, you're trying to make scare porn to put on television when the actual story you're telling doesn't match what you're telling, You should go, this is just like the gang expert testimony you use to destroy thousands of families, Amy.
The fact that Putin thinks it's okay to take kids out of orphanages and away.
No, he doesn't. The fact that Putin thinks it's okay to take kids out of active combat zones so they don't get their heads blown off by missiles
from their families just shows the evil.
Yeah, the fact that Putin wants to get kids out of active combat zones and not get killed. My goodness. I've shown you all this image before. I will show it again. This is a monument to all the children that Ukraine killed between 2014, when the Euromaidan coup happened, and 2022, when the special military operation got in. It's the Alley of Angels in the Donbass, in the Donetsk People's Republic. Ukraine was actively shelling and bombing the eastern republics, the Donbass region, and killing them. So, that was what was happening with our tax dollars. And they're so desperate to keep people from knowing that this happened, they actually banned the Wikipedia page. They've removed the Wikipedia page to this memorial over and over again. They don't want people to know that Ukraine's government murdered children.
And why it is so important for us to stand with Ukraine, this sovereign state.
Sovereign state, Ukraine, a sovereign state. You do realize that Ukraine's government was violently overthrown in 2014. The Euromaidan coup, the United States invaded, basically toppled the Ukrainian government with NGOs, installed a fanatically anti-Russian government, and the people in the eastern regions, the people in the eastern regions declared independence, right? So Ukraine is not sovereign. Do you realize the people of Ukraine voted for Zelensky because Zelensky said he would end the war? And then he got into office and realized, oh, he's not able to actually end the war because at this point, the war is very much, something that Ukraine doesn't have the right to end. This is ridiculous. This is beyond ridiculous. This is beyond ridiculous. And I mean, yeah, so Zelensky was elected to bring peace to Ukraine and couldn't do it because he's not the real leader, because Ukraine is not a sovereign nation.
Taken all the bloodshed and basically stopped Putin from marching right through Ukraine to other allies, NATO countries.
Yeah, that's what Putin wants to do. The whole reason that Russia is angry about Ukraine joining NATO is they don't want to have a war with NATO. Right? If a NATO country gets attacked, all the NATO countries have to go to war. So why is Russia angry about Ukraine joining NATO? Because they don't want there to be a situation where they can't fight with Ukraine without going to war with NATO. So why in the world would Russia, they're trying to go to war with the NATO countries and Ukraine is blocking them? No, they're trying to make sure they don't go to war with the NATO countries. That's the whole point. They don't want Ukraine to join NATO. Like, so, I mean, what in the world is this about? I mean, this story that Russia really wants to invade France and Russia really wants to invade Belgium, but Ukraine is holding them back. Like, what are you smoking? What are you smoking? If any of the NATO countries goes to war with Russia, right, then all of them do, and you've got nuclear war at this point. So no, Russia does not want to just march into France and Belgium and Italy, but luckily the Ukrainians are holding them back. This is like complete and utter delusion, right? Amy Klobuchar, I cannot stand Amy Klobuchar. I really cannot, and I really, really cannot stand her lies, etc. So yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there. I wanted to get that out of my system.